Hello there. In more EU unity, the Polish government is still intent on forging ahead with claims for reparations against Germany. Now, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and then like and comment below. The Polish have an ongoing claim against Germany concerning €1.3 trillion in reparations against Germany for what they did inside Poland during the Second World War. A friendly €1.3 trillion claim then. Now, I talked about this in a video on the 2nd of September when this first arose, and the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki was very scathing about the Germans back then. Here's what he said. "Ordinary Germans, if one can use this term when speaking about criminals, bandits, robbers and rapists, looted on their own accord and the German state plundered systematically. Without truth, without compensation, there can be no normal relationship between people, much less between states and nations. Pretending that nothing has happened or that little has happened takes you nowhere." Not exactly sitting on the fence with that one, was he? Understandable, perhaps, when you consider it was the 83rd anniversary of the start of the Second World War. But since the Second World War, Poland and Germany have become friends and partners within the EU, and they're both in NATO. So maybe it's a bit of blue with gold stars on blue with gold stars action. And the German response to this issue back in September was a curt, "The German government's position is unchanged. The reparations issue is closed." And since then there appears to have been no movement on the German side about this, so the Polish government now says it will escalate it through all the international forums to pursue its claim. So the newly appointed Polish Reparations Commissioner and Deputy Prime Minister Arkadiusz Malachik has travelled to Berlin and has called for an international conference on German reparations. And he said that Germany has a choice. Negotiate now, or Poland will go to the United Nations, the European Union, and the Council of Europe that controls the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Courts of Human Rights. And Malachik went on to say, "There must be dialogue on this issue, otherwise it would be very bad for our relations as neighbours." There's that EU unity breaking out all over again. Anyway, good luck with the EU. Germany controls that. And as to the United Nations, Russia sits on the UN Security Council and will veto anything like this, just in case it gives ideas to Ukraine and anyone else it's recently had a go at. But with the Council of Europe and the European Courts of Human Rights, it may well be different. According to the Polish Deputy Prime Minister, he had talks with the Council of Europe back in October, and out of this came a proposal to consider preparing a draft resolution on studying German policy in the field of exercising the right to fair compensation for all victims of the Second World War, the refusal to rectify these matters in the form of bilateral agreements, and the lack of a legal course of action for victims of the Second World War, and especially for victims from the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, Greece, Italy and Serbia. And Article 3 of the Hague Convention places the onus clearly on an aggressor nation for ensuring there is proper compensation for their actions. Now, as for the UK, it appears that we have no plans to reopen the issue of getting reparations from Germany after the Treaty on Final Settlement of 1990. But if the Polish claim gets off the ground, then you can bet your bottom dollar it will encourage those that want to take the UK to the cleaners. Now, this Polish claim resurfaces after a German prince and his wife were arrested, along with a couple of dozen others, in connection with a plot to overthrow the German government. And they'd been plotting and undergoing arms training since late last year with the help of a judge and several former service people, including from the German equivalent of the SAS. All sounds so eccentric and ludicrous, doesn't it? And maybe they were emulating Ursula von der Leyen's German army and training with broomstick handles. I wonder if one of them was paid to sit there stroking a white, fluffy cat. So, the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has decided that his recent sojourn into the sphere of £400,000 worth of celebrity, if you can call it that, has opened up a whole new avenue for him. And as a result, he's off and will stand down at the next general election to find new ways to communicate with the public. Or is it something to do with losing the Tory whip, and according to the Eye, having been on the wrong end of a vote of no confidence from his constituency party last month? I wonder if he's been offered a slot on a TV channel. They could call it Matt's Mucked Up, or maybe Hancock's Horrors. Just trying to keep it clean. And now let's talk about the green net zero agenda. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening. So, dear viewers, I think we should have an honest chat about this green agenda nonsense, because we as a society tend to become too polemic in our thinking, and it won't allow for nuances, this type of thinking won't, in debate. And like many of you, I've had enough of being told I have to go green. So allow me to go off on another of my stream of consciousness rants, because I feel they fully and more honestly address issues that we need to talk about. Okay, firstly, I would like to declare that I am opposed to the eco-loons and their anti-fossil fuel protests that are blighting Blighty, and as for man-made climate change, well, But imagine a Britain, a self-sufficient Britain, with clean air, clean water, and tasty, natural, non-industrial farmed food. Now, that's where the greenie in most of us pops up, and we should welcome that inner greenie, and not bundle it in with the actions of these just stop oil eco-zealots. You see, the way to improve the environment is not to build more wind turbines and support these green industries that are far from green, but to focus on what can be gained from living closer to the land and bring goods production closer to home. I mean, that doesn't sound too intrusive, does it? I am sure you have all heard about the prospect of these new climate lockdowns, as yet more freedom of movement is in the planning stages to be restricted, blah, 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 blah. But do you remember the first lockdown? Now, this might shock you, but I actually loved the first 2 weeks of the first lockdown, whereupon I wandered the streets of Brecon and the surrounding countryside like Will Smith in I Am Legend, and I travelled to see my young son in Newport, all because I could, of course. It was so nice to be able to enjoy the fresh and beautiful air and beautiful clear skies that were so blue that nature itself seemed to be just teeming with life, and the green foliage was glowing. And yes, even Newport was filled with fresh air. It was like taking a glimpse into a world before the Industrial Revolution, a world not experienced by the people in this country for generations. It made me think of the possibilities of how much different our health and environment would be without our modern way of living, yet there are aspects of our modern way of living that none of us would want to lose. Can't we have the best of both worlds? So let's take a look at the centre point of meeting of these two worlds, the local artisan market. Yes, I know, all these artisan markets are usually filled with annoying hipsters with stupidly groomed beards and ladies wearing dungarees with hair that was last washed in the 90s. Yes, these ladies then bath in a bath filled with the spit of 1,000 wasps and toad milk. But these markets are also fantastic places and sell locally produced goods that cuts down our reliance on imports, And that is far more green than stopping any freedom of movement. Freshly grown food and locally sourced goods can only be a good thing. I myself still use the supermarkets for my food and whatnot because, well, they are cheap, and artisan craft foods and produce do come with a hefty premium. And that premium is not always affordable, especially during a cost of living crisis. But were we all to shift towards local shopping, the money supply in our local areas would be recycled and not go into the pockets of shareholders in lands yonder, but instead it would mean higher wages for local workers, who in turn have a greater level of disposable income to spend within their local communities. You see, a locally recycled money supply means greater wealth and smaller businesses that can then flourish, with a knock-on effect of a wealth spread as small business owners spend their profits in their own communities and local economy, providing that they are shopping themselves within the local economy and not outside of it. And eventually, regional currencies can then flourish in these micro-economies, further insulating them from the ebbs and flows of globalization. We don't need climate lockdowns restricting our rights to travel. We need to rediscover where we live. And that was one of the parts of the original lockdown that I and many others did enjoy. Well, probably the only part of the lockdown that we enjoyed. You see, our dirty cities and towns only exist because the people, many generations ago, were kicked off the land by the elite in the Enclosures Acts and forced to move to the towns and cities, just as we are seeing once again through the new green agenda taking grip in Europe at the behest of the WEF. Just ask the Dutch farmers. It is indeed true. We have become far too removed from our natural state, and the transhumanists love it. Bring back the horse and cart, I say. I will never forget the stories in Merthyr Tydfil where I spent much of my youth. You know, the stories of the old traders in the town who would leave their horse and carts outside the pub so they could meet with their friends and do business and have a drink with them at the end of the evening. And then eventually, when they've had their fill of beer, they would lie down in the back of the cart and the horse would then take them home unmanned. Yes, that does sound very irresponsible, especially in this day of health and safety, but it speaks of a time when life was done differently. A green society should not mean a controlled society, but a libertarian one. But I don't think the WEF want you to think like that. They want you to be subservient to their ungodly green religion. There is nothing wrong with being green, just don't tell me how to do it. Back over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Richard. And finally, when subscribing, please don't forget to press that little bell and also select the all option, or you won't get any notifications when I publish a new video. And thank you all so much for taking the time to watch the show.